Okay, so that's me, and let's go back. That's not me. Oh, that's right, still in me. All right, so air pollution is present and air pollution is bad for you. This is basically the reason when you see smoggy air, that's because there's particles in the air. There are a number of things in the air that can cause you to have problems with your health. I take care of people with asthma. That's an irritating, inflammatory disease of the lungs, but it can also affect you in your bloodstream. And when that occurs, you can have heart problems, you can have vascular problems, you have increased clots. There are a lot of things that can happen when you are exposed either chronically or abruptly to high levels of air pollutants. This was in, let's see here. So this is the 2008 fires in Eastern Carolina. I don't know which stock city I got from Google from this, but this is a Chinese stock city from Google. But this shows you different levels of air pollutants in areas in the United States that seem to have higher levels of particulates at various sizes. That's one of a number of pollutants that can cause a problem. Okay, so I take care of asthma. You can tell this is a person with asthma. They're using an inhaler. Asthma attacks usually occur, by the way, the day after pollutant exposure. It's not usually the same day. That's a misconception that people have. And people with different genetic backgrounds may be at more risk to having a problem with an asthma attack than others. So a gene we're fond of, so a gene similar to the one that Linda mentioned was glutathione transferase mu1. And 40% of you will have genetic backgrounds that do not allow you to make that protein. That means you're more susceptible to the effect of ozone or particulates than other people. If you're asthma and you have that, you're maybe more likely to have an asthma attack. There's also information that suggests that if you have cardiovascular disease, that particular gene may make you be more likely to have a stroke or a heart attack, or have, the big one is congestive heart failure associated with particulate matter. So the reason for this is to point out that, I mentioned genetic factors. So there are a couple of things that make risk factors for having disease, for having a problem with polluted air. One is the presence of a specific disease. I mentioned asthma, a variety of cardiovascular diseases. Obesity per se can be a problem, the way you handle pollutants and your risk for other diseases, including pollutant-induced diseases, different. Diabetics have increased problems associated with air pollutants. There's this thing called epigenetics. So there's genetics, which are the genes you have. There's epigenetics, which controls which genes are turned on. And some environmental agents can actually change which genes are turned on, even if you have the right genes. If they're not able to be turned on, they may not protect you, or if they're inappropriately turned on, you may get sick. And my favorite gene, because I've been able to convince Linda's Institute to give me money to study this frequently, and I have a job, my daughter went to school, all things are good. So I really like glutathione transferase mu1. I would like it better if this thing worked. So there we go. So the other thing about air pollution, so pollution is bad and making more pollution is worse, but there are things that you can do to minimize your exposure to pollutants. One of those things is choosing where you live. Now, I'm not talking about just do you live in a city versus a less polluted area, but your proximity to a heavily traveled road is a big deal. If you live within 500 meters, because I know that when you bought your house, you took a yardstick and you measured 500 yards away from the heavily measured road, and you decided, I'm not going to live any closer to that. The data are pretty clear. If you live close to one of those roads, your likelihood of having an asthma attack, your likelihood of having a stroke, your likelihood of having congestive heart failure effect associated with pollutants is going to be worse. So both your decision where you live and zoning policy could actually impact how, proximity roads. So that's something that could actually be done. So again, zoning locations of roads, we could actually drive cleaner cars and have lesser emissions. You can protect yourself, and that's the other thing. So one of the things we actually study a variant of vitamin E to see if that will protect you from the effect of air pollutants, and our data would suggest that it does. But even if you're an asthmatic, if you take inhaled steroids, if you take a big dose, there's some data suggests that that might protect you from an air pollution effect the next day. So one of the things we're trying to do is to figure out what people could do for themselves to protect themselves from the environment. Part of that is being active in your communities, so you can zone, you can drive cleaner cars, you can ask for better mass transit, you can do things that decrease the pollutants in the air. but there's also things you can do directly for yourself. The other thing you can make a decision on is whether or not you choose to exercise vigorously when there's a high pollution area, day. The amount of air pollution you get is a function of how much is in the air, how long you're exposed to it, and what your minute ventilation is. So raise your hand if you know what minute ventilation is. Now, of course you do. They give me money to study minute ventilation. Yeah, be quiet. That minute ventilation is literally how much you breathe in a minute, and how much of that determines your dose. So you may make decisions to exercise in the morning, unless you're allergic and you were exposed to pollens, because that's when plants like to pollinate. But if you're worried about pollution, then exercising in the morning may be better than the afternoon if you exercise outside. So there are things that you can do to protect yourself. There are things we could do as communities to protect ourselves. And with that, I'm happy to take questions before Heatlight does something else with noise. Thank you very much.